Chapter 7 Home with Samson. Barely clearing the alligator's gaping mouth, Aiden landed on its back, like a trick rider at a carnival. Though it didn't seem so at the moment, this was a remarkable stroke of providence. Aiden's first instinct was to jump from the beast's back and swim to safety, but it took him only a split second to realize that he had no chance of outmaneuvering an alligator in the water. He decided he was safer where he was. He scrabbled up the ridge back to a spot just behind the beast's head. He reached up under the alligator's forelegs and hugged as tightly as he could, trying to think what to do next. When the alligator recovered from the initial shock of having a boy leap onto its back, it began to thrash back and forth with a violence that nearly shook Aiden's teeth loose. Aiden was nearly drowned with the splashing, and the bellowing roar of the furious alligator nearly deafened him. He was also taking a beating from the oaken pole, which had not broken free from the noose. But as long as he could maintain his grip, he was relatively safe. The alligator couldn't bend its head around to bite him, and its tail, though it whipped around only inches away and could knock him senseless with a single blow, didn't quite reach him. Aiden saw no plan of escape from this predicament. He couldn't signal his brothers for help. There was no way to reach for his hunting horn without losing his grip. The alligator, however, did have a new plan. It rolled over on its back, dunking Aiden under the river. It continued rolling over and over in a sickening spin. Growing dizzy and disoriented, Aiden found it difficult to catch a breath without sucking in as much water as air. But he managed to hang on, and he was grateful to have not cracked his head on an underwater root or stump. He was also grateful that the alligator didn't roll onto its back and sink to the river mud, crushing him under its mass. The alligator finally stopped rolling. Perhaps it was getting dizzy too. But Aiden's reprieve lasted only a few short seconds. The scaly beast carried him out toward the deep part of the river. When it had swum a few powerful strokes, it went into a steep dive. It intended to drown the boy, who wouldn't get off its back. But Aiden knew something the alligator didn't know. The other end of the rope was still tied to the big cypress, and it couldn't pay out much farther. When he felt the rope grow taut, Aiden gathered up the last of his strength. Just as the rope jerked the alligator backward in a half flip, Aiden propelled himself forward from the top of the alligator's head, as if from a springboard. He leaped clear out into the middle of the river. He had escaped as long as the rope held. He swam out another 10 strokes or so and then let the current carry him well beyond the reach of the great reptile, which was still thrashing at the end of its rope. When he was safely downstream, he swam with labored strokes back to the shallows, then waded to the sandy banks on trembling legs. He blew 3 blasts on his hunting horn, then lay exhausted on the bank, waiting for his brothers to arrive. The trials experienced by the Arrelsons as they hauled the alligator to the riverbank, tied it up, loaded it onto a mule-drawn hay cart, and drove it to the manor house comprise a long and colorful story, too long to recount in detail. The whole adventure consumed a full afternoon and involved 6 broken ropes, the near total destruction of a hay cart, and numerous scrapes and bruises to the Arrelson brothers. Percy, who had the unenviable job of roping the thrashing tail, was flung into the river twice. The Arrelsons eventually had to call on 10 farm workers from the indigo field to help them heave the great beast onto the cart. No one suffered any serious harm, and no harm of any sort came to the tough old alligator. Waiting in front of the manor house, Errol beamed with pride as he watched his sons trudge up the path. The splintered cart tilted dangerously to one side, then to the other, as the alligator hurled itself against the side of the cart. The mules, clearly displeased, flattened their ears back against their heads. Percy halted them in the shade of a great oak tree that overhung the path. Errol peered over the side of the wagon at the trussed and blindfolded alligator. "Just look at the great blind Samson," he laughed as the reptile again threw itself at the wall of the cart. "He's determined to bring the walls down on himself like Samson of old." From that moment on, the alligator went by the name of Samson. "Boys," Errol continued. That's a fine animal you've caught. He'll make quite an addition to King Darrow's collection. Aiden felt a twinge of sadness at the thought of this magnificent creature, once the master of all he surveyed, becoming part of anyone's collection, even a king's. Before this moment, he had given little thought to how the alligator might feel about things. Errol saw the sadness in his son's face. Aiden, you needn't worry about Samson. He'll be right at home in the moat of Tambluff Castle. Plenty to eat, plenty of smaller alligators to boss, a nice sandbar to sun himself on. Alligators don't ask for much more than that, do they? I don't suppose so, Aiden answered, but he suspected that Samson would have preferred to be left alone. Yes, I'll be very proud to give such a creature to King Darrow, all the prouder because my sons captured him. He patted Aiden's shoulder. And I was thinking because you boys were the ones who caught him, maybe you'd like to be the ones to deliver him to King Darrow. The Errolsons looked at their father, then at each other, disbelieving. Was father talking about a trip to Tambluff Castle? None of Errol's sons, not even Brennus or Maynard, had ever set foot within the castle walls. There was hardly anything they more desired to do. We have been invited to Darrow's castle on Midsummer's Night, 2 weeks hence, for a treaty feast. A wave of excitement rippled through Errol's sons. Which of us is invited? Jasper asked attentively, afraid even to hope that he might be included. All of us, Errol answered. The 24 nobles are all invited, and all of their sons. A treaty feast. The Errolsons could hardly contain their excitement. There can be no treaty feast without a treaty, said Jasper. Have we made a new alliance? A cloud passed over Errol's face. Yes, with the Perthan Empire, he answered. We have made an alliance with our bitterest enemy. Why do you frown? Asked Brennus. This is wonderful news to have our most dangerous enemy become our friend. They have been fearsome foes these many years, Errol answered. But I fear their friendship more than I fear their enmity. But father, Maynard persisted, with the great empire as our ally, what other enemy could rise against us? With Perth as a friend, said Errol, we may have no need of enemies. They do not love what we love. They only love power. He gestured at a great, sprawling live oak that shaded them. What is this, Maynard? Maynard thought the question odd, but certainly not hard to answer. It's an oak tree. You see a tree, answered Errol. A person sees lumber. He ran his hand along the low sweep of a massive limb. You find beauty in such a graceful curve. A person sees the curving rib of an Imperial Navy's next warship. Samson crashed against the wagon. Errol nodded toward the sound. You thought that was an alligator? No, that's 7 pairs of officer boots. Boys, he continued, don't you ever forget how we got here. When the kingdom of Alberti fell to the Perthans, your great-great-grandparents and a handful of others decided they'd rather take their chances on this uninhabited island than live under Perthan rule. No matter how many times he recounted this history, Errol still grew misty-eyed to think of his forebears, the last free people on a vast continent, giving up all their worldly goods and comforts to start their lives over in a teeming wilderness. Our very existence is an act of defiance against the Perthan Empire. 4 times they invaded this land, and 4 times the stout men of Cornwall sent them home in disgrace. Errol smiled as he thought of it. They've swallowed up a whole continent, but people who have a taste for freedom aren't easily conquered. Errol had spent much of his adult life fighting Perthans. Indeed, it seemed that all the suffering experienced by Errol and his family had come at the hand of the great empire. He still walked with a slight limp, his leg having been crushed by a Perthan catapult stone 10 years earlier at the forced siege of Tambluff. Twice he had rebuilt the manor house after Perthan raiders had torched it in the second and third Western invasions. Countless friends had died in battles with the Perthans, and Errol's dearest treasure, They had taken that too. His wife, Sophrona, was killed in a Persian raid while Arrow was away at the forced siege. Aiden was only 2 years old. Boys, you know I'm an old warrior, but I've never been a warmonger. I hope I've taught you to seek peace wherever it can be found. But an alliance with the Persians? Earl's voice trailed off. Times are changing, boys. Not everybody still keeps the old Cornwalder ways. There aren't many of the 24 nobles who still make their sons work alongside their farm hands. He nudged Brennus, who had often voiced this very complaint. Of the 24, I think I'm the only one who still wears homespun. I know things change. Still, I keep asking one question. Can Cornwall be a friend to Perth and still be Cornwall? Earl grew quiet as thoughts of the future crowded upon him. But he soon shook off his gloom. The king knows my mind. So do the 24, and they have decided to go forward with this alliance. There's nothing left now but to stand with them. We will speak no more of this today. I'll get Smithy started building a cage of iron and oak for Samson. From the looks of this hay cart, offered Percy, you'd better talk to Wagner, too.